Hello everyone, welcome to your no-nonsense guide on how to play the Scandinavian defense. This will be a very practical opening for beginners, meaning instead of showing you the absolute objectively best way to play, I'm going to show you a very easy system that works great against human beings instead of computers that is specifically built to be blunderproof. So after pawn to e4, we'll play the Scandinavian with pawn to d5. So most of the time, a white will end up capturing the pawn, and I will get into this later. This will be what most of the video is about, but white also has two pretty common sidelines. The first is pushing up to e5, but this is not very good because we have a very simple setup. We'll play bishop to f5, and then pawn to e6, and then after this, a very important move, pawn to c5. Striking in the center, if white captures, we can take back of our other bishop, and we already have an advantage in this position. And the other sideline they can play is knight to f3, which is the Tennyson gambit. The idea of this is that after we capture, white will play knight to g5, and this gets into a ton of tactics, and instead of playing into white's hand, I recommend to simply play pawn to e5. White will capture the pawn, and now we get aggressive with pawn to f5, attacking white's knight. It will back up, and after a simple knight to f6, we already have an advantage here, and black scores extremely well here. So those are the two main sidelines, but now let's get into the big meat of this, which is if white captures the pawn. If they do this, then we will capture back with our queen, and now the most common move for white is to play knight to c3 to attack our queen, but white can also play like knight to f3, pawn to d4. If they play anything else, then we have virtually the exact same setup. So after knight to c3, attacking our queen, we are simply going to drop it over to a5. And this is a very good square for it because it is pretty far out of the way, it can't really be attacked very easily, but also it is still controlling some squares. It has this diagonal to the white king, it has all these squares, and it's still doing a decent job. So once again, white has a lot of moves, but the most common is pawn to d4, at which point I recommend a very practical move here, pawn to c6. The idea is to open up these two squares for our queen to run to. That way, if white ever plays bishop to d2, x-raying our queen to be ultra blunderproof, we're simply going to drop it back to c7. And no, this is not the objectively best way to play it. However, I think for beginners, it is a very good way to prevent any dumb blunders. So if they ever play bishop to d2, you know that is your sign to move your queen to c7. But bishop to d2 is not the most common, instead something like knight to f3, at which point we'll develop this knight to f6, and then develop our bishop to g4, to pin this knight to white's queen, and after castles, we'll play pawn to e6. This move opens up our bishop, as well as really clamps down on the d5 square, making it that white can really never put any pieces there. And there are two main things you want to remember here. The first one is that if white ever plays pawn to h3 to attack our bishop, we do not want to trade, but instead just drop it back to h5 and retain this pin here. And the second thing is that a very common blunder for white to make is bishop to g5. And the reason this is a blunder is that our queen actually sees it. That is the advantage of putting our queen on a5, and we can actually just win it with bishop takes on f3, queen takes, and after queen takes on g5, we are just up an entire piece here and winning. So that is a good blunder to keep in mind, but the most common move for white to play here is rook to e1, the best move, at which point we'll develop this knight to d7, just be ultra solid, and after something like bishop to d2, remember that's our cue to move our queen to c7, pawn to h3, remember that's our cue to move the bishop back to h5 to retain this pin, and after something like queen to e2, we'll develop our bishop to d6. Let's say white plays something random, we'll simply castle, and now we just have an ultra solid position. And this setup with the two knights like this, the bishop and the queen, and this bishop on h5 or g4 there, is the setup you'll want to go for in most of your games. Alright, thanks for watching this no-nonsense guide. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.